This path, which leads to our pond, over the years as we've walked on it, has sunken down a small amount. It's not really all that much, but the issue is that when it's anything but quite dry, the water on this hillside, because this is the lowest spot, collects in this, and then because it's continuous, kind of flows down it, which isn't so nice to get your feet muddy walking back to the house after jumping in the pond where you just got all nice and clean. But not an easy task to solve. As you can see, I'm digging up the grass, which might seem counterintuitive until you realize that I've done it before and these are a little bit higher. That's because my intention is to put some gravel, which I dug out of our stream, underneath these grass squares that I'm digging up, and these are dug about the size that I can move. Trying to make them thin, and yes, I realize there is a much better tool for this job, a turf cutter, but, well, I don't feel like renting one. I'm not even sure where I would around here. Probably they are for rental. I just haven't looked into it because, well, this works well enough. And then I get down and flop it out of the way. While I've mostly been doing this in little bits and pieces, there actually is quite some benefit to doing this all at one time, or doing multiple of these chunks all at one time, in that once you get one up, you can get under here and make much better cuts that aren't as rough, and thus, if they aren't as rough, I can make them closer to the surface, which means that these blocks can be lighter weight, which means they're easier to move. This is also just faster. But, and while I would always do these in pairs, doing a next one up will also make that easier, rather than doing just this, filling it in, and then doing the next one up. And I'll be doing that, but it's just something that it takes a decent amount of time and quite a bit of energy, which then takes away my motivation to do more than like one wheelbarrow load of gravel at a time. But it works. And this was what I was meaning about doing it in series, making it work better. So I'm able to get into here and work on this side. It's not a ton compared to the other side, but then I get it on both of these. It's actually less than that other side, but I can do it on the one that I haven't gotten to yet. I was mentioning that it's not so fun to get mud on your feet. It's also not so fun to get gravel or dirt on your feet, which is one of the reasons that I'm going through this effort of lifting up the sod rather than just putting this gravel down on top of it. It's my idea that this grass, which is nice and healthy, can continue to be nice on our feet rather than having to wait months or years to get a nice layer of grass that protects our feet from the dirt and keeps them clean as we walk back to the house. So with this, I'm mounding it up in the center with the intention to kind of, instead of making this a depression, is to make it a high point. And probably over a number of years, the ground will smush around and end up being potentially a low point again, or we see it in our driveway. But I'm hoping that this gravel will act as kind of a relatively solid material that won't move too much. And while this gravel at current coming from our stream is probably lacking a lot of the fine clay particles that our very clayey soil has, would act fairly well as like well-draining material, reasonably well-draining material, nothing like a washed stone, but reasonably well-draining material. But that's not really my intention, because I'm not wrapping this in like a geotextile to keep that fine stuff out. I'm just putting it in and then flopping it back. My intention is just to raise the grade so that water doesn't collect here. Instead, it sheds off. If I was really trying to make something super well drained, I'd make a little geotextile burrito around some well-drained stone. But I just don't think that that's necessary for this level of work. Then it's time to flop the grass back in, because this is all I'm doing for today, not doing another section. And this grass is fairly, it's fairly obvious it's been dug up because it's been moved around so much. But I hope that in the start of next year, it can, with us walking on it and just kind of the natural water pushing it around, it can become smoother and back to being like a lawn. So I'll have to see how this is doing next summer. Now in mid-May, I just jumped into the pond for my first time this year, and walking up the path on the area I did this, it's pretty nice. I'm not getting into the mud or anything like that. It's just like I walk along it, and yeah, it hasn't grown back to looking like a lawn yet. There's still like rather like deep cuts in it, and one of my concerns was how easy or difficult this would be to mow, and it really isn't bad to mow. It may get a little bit shorter in the middle than I'd really like, but I think that will smush out over time, and it's not difficult to mow. So yeah, walking along here, it is dry, as opposed to just up the trail. Where it's rather wet. And given that this area is closer to the house, so my work down there is kind of a moot point if my feet get dirty up here. I think I might focus on this area next rather than just continuing it from up there. So there's at least some area for the feet to get cleaned off before they get back to the house. And eventually I'd like to do the whole thing. Though way more work, adding this gravel under the grass is way more functional and looks a lot nicer than just putting a little bit of gravel on top of the grass like we tried in another spot.